Study Session 4, The Age of Exploration and New Monarchies. Motives for Age of Exploration are gold, God, and glory. Simple. Portugal. Overview. They had a low population and a terrible economy, but they led the charge for exploration. They had influential leaders who saw the usefulness of travel. Prince Henry the Navigator. He was infatuated with seafaring. He founded the first navigation school in Europe to teach explorers how to navigate the long-range voyages. Also interested in cartography, the school was supposed to draw men of courage to take the voyages. Exploration of West Africa. Portuguese begins exploring down the West African coast, in order to reach Asia. Portugal becomes the world power almost overnight. Bartholomew Diaz. Diaz reaches the Cape of Good Hope first, but mutiny causes them to turn around. Vasco da Gama. Vasco da Gama makes it to India in 1499, but the Arabs drive them out. The spices he brings back are worth more than Portugal at the time. Da Gama returns with forces and captures the Indian coast. Skip Portuguese strategies. Pedro Cabral. He was a Portuguese navigator who is generally credited as the first European to reach Brazil. His expedition was also the second from Europe to reach India via the sea route around the Cape of Good Hope. The Treaty of Tordesillas. This is when Pope Alexander VI makes a treaty that gives Portugal India, Africa, and Brazil, while Spain gets much of the rest of the New World in 1494. New World discovery. Christopher Columbus. He was rejected by Genoa and Venice and Portugal before Isabella approved his voyage across the Atlantic. His idea was not a terrible one at the time. In 1492, he reaches the Bahamas and brings back gold and, more importantly, stories of the natives. John Cabot. John Cabot was a navigator and explorer who by his voyages in 1497 and 98 helped lay the groundwork for the later British claims to Canada. The exact details of his life and his voyages are still subjects of controversy among historians and cartographers. Vasco Núñez de Balboa. He hiked across Panama and was the first European to see the Pacific Ocean. Ferdinand Magellan. He was the first to reach India around South America. He left with 6 ships and 280 men. He sailed down South America and got caught up in the Rio de la Plata for a month and a half. It took him 13 months to reach the Strait of Magellan, and he killed any mutinous men. It took 5 months to cross the Pacific, and he got involved in the Filipino Civil War and dies. His ship makes it back with 13 men, but not him. He was the first to be credited with circumnavigating the world. The Spanish Empire. The overview. Spain was much better off than Portugal and had just been unified with the marriage of Ferdinand and Isabella. Isabella funds Columbus and has the desire to spread Catholicism and also the money to do so. Hernan Cortes. He was a famous conquistador who originally was a lower Spanish noble. He rises to second in command to the governor of Cuba. Cortes hears about the Aztecs and requests men from the Cuban governor who denies him. Cortes steals ships and men to go check out the Aztecs. He finds the remnants of the Mayans and he heads up the peninsula where he sets up a fort at Veracruz. After burning the ships, Cortes takes 400 men and heads to the Aztecs' capital at Tenochtitlan and conquers them. Francisco Pizarro. He is the conquistador responsible for the conquest of the Incas in South America. The Incas were ripe for conquest after already being devastated by smallpox and having just survived a civil war that Atahualpa won. Pizarro meets the Incas at Cajamarca, where he hides his men to seem unthreatening. When Atahualpa rejects the Bible, Pizarro's men charge out of the hills and massacre the Incas. They later kill Atahualpa with a garrote after forcibly baptizing him. Conquistadors. Instead of sailing for exploration, these men sailed for conquest and money. Spanish administration in the New World. The encomienda system was set up, where natives were forced into labor by the Spanish, who brutally forced them to mine and dive for pearls for them. 40% of the native population of the Americas dies. Hispaniola goes from a population of 100,000 to 375 years. They had no concern for human life, and the clergy even turned a blind eye to it for money. Bartolomeu de las Casas. He was a friar who blew the whistle on the Spanish treatment when he writes Tears of the Indians. This causes a shift into the viceroy system. The viceroy system is a governmental setup where officials head up the northern and southern parts of the Spanish Empire. The north had a capital city in Mexico City, and the south had a capital in Lima, Peru. Spanish missionaries skip over it. The Columbian Exchange. This was an exchange of spices and diseases between continents. Triangular trade is the trade between Europe, the New World, and Africa that set up the trade for the goods of the New World, the slaves out of Africa, and the control of it all by the Europeans. Origins of the slave trade. Origins of the slave trade began with the need for more labor in the New World to produce goods for the Europeans. The Commercial Revolution. Introduction of new products creates a new capitalist-based economy. Supply and demand became a problem, and stable currencies came about that were based on the gold standard. We're skipping over price revolution and banking. New monarchies. The modern state in Europe comes about as monarchs begin consolidating their power. This was done by eliminating the noble class, by gaining the support of the lower class, and rallying them against the parliament. In England, the War of the Roses. I'm going to advise you to read the chart that I gave you for this earlier. It is going to help you much more than any explanation I can give you here. Henry VII. Tudors, having Lancaster ties, challenges Richard. Richard dies in a battle and Henry Tudor becomes king. Henry brings together the York and Lancaster clans by marrying Elizabeth of York. Henry limits the power of the nobility by not allowing them to hold private armies. France. Burgundy. The size and provincialism of France opposed consolidation, as the nobles of France were by far the most powerful in Europe. While France is regrouping, the country of Burgundy expands, controlling the lowlands and the lower Rhineland. Charles the Bold, Duke of Burgundy, as is everything a leader should be. He helped grow the Burgundian Empire. Charles attacks the Swiss cantons at the Battle of Nancy, and the Burgundians lose. Charles the Bold is killed and chopped up. The Burgundians take massive hits as nobles fight over power. Louis XI, the Spider. He lacked an army to consolidate French power and thus turns nobles against each other by spinning webs of deceit. As the noble class weakens, they look to him for leadership. Louis creates a taxation system in France, the taille, a major tax on the third estate for over 400 years. The aide is a tax on wine and beef, and the gabelle is a tax on salt. With this money, he raises an army. Spain. In the 1400s, there were three Spanish kingdoms, Castile, Aragon, and Granada. Castile was the largest and wealthiest, the most devout Catholic area in Europe. Aragon was the most warlike and military-based. Granada was constantly shrinking and was inhabited by the Arabs. The marriage of Ferdinand and Isabella is what unites Aragon and Castile. This marriage was kept secret for 6 years because they married at the age of 14. The Reconquista of Granada is the retaking of Granada that was ordered by mainly by Isabella and was completed in 1492. Isabella realized that Catholic unity was what would unite Spain. The Spanish Inquisition and the Alhambra Decree was a unification of Spanish Catholics against Spanish Jews. The Alhambra gave Jews the option to convert, flee, or die. However, this eventually became just flee or die. Dynastic struggles between Henry VII, Francis I, and Henry VIII, Francis I, and Charles V. Again, I'm going to refer you back to your notes on this because it is much more convoluted and complicated than I can explain on here to do it justice.